welcome back to MFA Writers. My name is Bree Gumaz, and I am your co-producer. March has flown by, the AWP conference is over, and many of you are on spring break. March seems to be the month of colds this year, and Jared did not get out unscathed. As he focuses on getting well, we are going to release one of his favorite episodes for you. But before we begin, if you ever have comments or questions, we would love to hear from you. Send us a DM, tag us, or comment on our latest post on Instagram and Twitter. Or email us at mfawriterspodcast@gmail.com. If you would like to be a guest on our show or know someone who would be a great fit, you can apply at mfawriters.com. And while you're on there, if you love the podcast and would like to support us, you can buy us a coffee or donate directly at buymeacoffee.com/mfawriters. Your donations make all the difference, and every time we see one pop up in our inbox, know that it makes us smile and feel all sorts of loved. Last but not least, don't forget one of the greatest contributions of all, which is rating and reviewing the podcast on your podcast player of choice. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode. Until then.
Welcome to MFA Writers, the podcast where we talk to creative writing MFA students about their program, their process, and a piece they're working on. I'm your host, Jared McCormick. Today I'm with Wilson M. Sims. Wilson is a behavioral health worker and policy strategist in the final year of his MFA program at Florida Atlantic University. His work is in Long Reads, the Florida Review, Witness Magazine, and Virginia Quarterly Review. He is the winner of the 2022 Lasso Prize in Creative Nonfiction, and his essay Unknown Costs received a special mention in the 2025 Pushcart Anthology. Today, Wilson is going to read an excerpt from his piece titled Nothing to Nine and Back, which was recently published at Virginia Quarterly Review.
Jared, thanks so much for having me. And thank you for what this podcast does. I'm going to read a really quick excerpt from my lyric essay in VQR. It's called Nothing to Nine and Back. And this is actually from towards the ending. But as you read it, you can piece all these things together. I'm a boy in a grown body, trying to be brave, 28 years old, on the phone with a reporter. She says there are survivors who wish to share their stories, but Kanakuk litigiously quiets them. There were symptoms of abuse surrounding Pete, signs camp may have preferred the profits of prestige to child protection. She asks me to remember on record. I scramble to find or fill the hole or gap, to recollect the little boy strides I must have taken from the fire beside that river to the barn where my bunk was. I have done this before. I did it when Pete was arrested. I did it when Pete was sentenced. I did it when my dad said, "Did anything happen?" I did it when each lost love of my life held my head between their hands and said, "Trust me." I did it when each teacher or preacher said, "Have faith." And I did it the day before yesterday and the day before that. I want to trust, but can't repair my faith in the truth. I want to remember, but can't find a reliable reel. I ask my mind to travel back to the walk across the country still called camp. I go there as my mind-made avatar of me, and sometimes I see the version I call memory. We're silent and reverent across baseball, football, and soccer fields. We're ascending 100 stairs between the bunks and riverbanks, and then we're shuffling and sliding through gravel. I watch his hands, his hips, his eyes, and then we separate and I'm safe, alone. A boy in the bunk of his first real barn, sleeping with a marked stone of salvation. Other times, I watch what I fear I'm too afraid to see. Just me and Pete beside the fire and the river and the fields.
Wilson, that was great. Thank you so much for reading that. Thanks for being here. I'm really excited to chat.
Yeah, man, me too.
So that piece you read from, Nothing to Nine and Back, which you mentioned is published in Virginia Quarterly Review. Listeners can find it at vqronline.org. I highly suggest people go find it, give the whole thing a read, because it really is a really great, beautiful piece. And I really love the way those little moments that you alluded to, those little moments in your life kind of become building blocks that slowly come together to form that bigger story, with much bigger implications, which we get like a little preview of there in that excerpt. When I was reading it, it made me wonder about your writing process and how you decide which of these little moments to explore and put into this essay.
The what is your writing process question, that's folks who like to write, I think we really enjoy talking about it. I know I appreciate hearing how other people are approaching things. But I also think there's a risk of cementing or trapping myself into a certain process or procedure that might be limiting. So, like, for example, I had ideas about what my writing process was before I got into the MFA. And then part of what the MFA has done is require me to engage with myriad forms of writing where I have found maybe, quote, my writing process isn't actually my writing process. It is a process at a particular time for a particular piece of writing.
Yeah. I do think that there is that risk of, I don't know, when you're learning creative writing, when you're getting into these MFAs and you're like learning all these new craft ideas, you're hearing from all these different writers about their processes, you can fall into that trap where you're like, okay, I just need to like figure out what my process is. And once I figure that out, then I'll just be able to follow those steps every time. And at the end of that process, there will be a publishable story. And that's not the way creative writing works. And I think that's partially why creative writing is so interesting and keeps us coming back, is because no story is the same, right? The process for writing each story is different. And so for me, what I would say is part of my process is reminding myself that whatever that you think your process is, it might not work for this story. So part of my process is kind of forcing myself to let go at the start when I'm drafting and just like allow myself to approach the story anew every time and allow the process to find me every time, which is easier said than done.
No, but I love that. I love that as a process answer. Is that my process always involves reminding myself that I may not have yet discovered the process for this piece.
Yeah.
And I think part of what gets tricky, or at least what I observed, is there can be some, when you show up at an MFA program, there are a lot of folks who are really well read in different areas. They have all sorts of experiences. Maybe some have had publishing success already. And as we approach this thing and we put so much into it, financially, maybe where we're living, opportunity costs, the jobs that we're not working because we're in school, not to mention just saying out loud by entering a program, that is an announcement that I would like to take this thing sort of seriously. And so you take all of that investment and you add a little bit of insecurity. And I think something that I have seen is maybe students can try to grasp for some security or confidence in making declarative statements about their writing life. So, for example, my process is,
Right.
or I am a nonfiction writer,
Right.
or I only write poetry. I'm a poet. And we try these labels on so that it's like, okay, am I real? Do I belong here? But as we repeat those in our minds, I think it can lead to the trap. It can lead to a process that doesn't include asking myself how the process might be this time.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I guess it's natural. Just as human beings, we want some sense of control. We want things to fall into a pattern. If we start at A and we follow the steps in the process, it will lead to B.
It's so interesting that it's all absolutely true of craft. And it is also seems to be true of so many of the stages of writing life. And by that, I mean, in the same way that I would like a blueprint, and there are some craft books that I do think offer some some potentially helpful blueprints. Like Matt Bell's Refuse to Be Done comes to mind. I want a blueprint, though, for how to get into the MFA program that I want to get into.
Right.
And then I want a blueprint for how to get my essays or stories published in the magazines or journals where I want them published. And then I want the blueprint for the agent. And the answers and perhaps the questions, much like craft, is that it is so variable.
Yeah, right.
And so how do we help each other? And I think that's what this, well, you tell me. Your podcast is trying to answer or wrestling with some of those questions and answers for sake of prospective students. So what do we do?
Well, I mean, the way that I approach craft, and this is not the way I've always approached it, but it is the way that I think about it now, having done all of these interviews with all these people who have different processes, who have stories they've written that have worked when they wrote it this way and didn't work when they wrote it this way. The way I think about craft now is when I say, this is my process, what I'm really saying is, this is a thing that worked for me once. Give it a shot. It may or may not work for you, but if it does, awesome. Maybe it'll work for one story for you, and maybe it won't work for others. But I'm always looking for a way to get that one story out, right? To make that one story work. So I think we do need to approach craft, or I would recommend that we approach craft discussions in a way that is not declarative, that's not saying, this is the way that I have found works, and if you do this, it'll work for you. It's really just like, here are a bunch of ideas that have worked for me at different points, and this worked for somebody else at different points, and this worked for other people at different points. Give it a try. See what works for you at any given moment. But just like workshop, where you're getting lots of advice on your story, probably 90% of that stuff should be thrown out, right? There's probably only like 10% of it at most that's going to work for you. And you have to learn to be comfortable with that too, to give things a try and also not try things because you just know, oh, that's not going to work for me. I know myself enough at this point to know, oh, that thing's not going to work for me. Glad it worked for you, but that's not going to work for me.
I totally agree. And I think that if I could visit past self, if I could visit past self, there'd be a lot of changing going on. but if I could visit past self just prior to the MFA, I think that, because what you're talking about is, it's almost like universe expansion. So instead of prescriptions for how to write or how to get into school or how to get an agent, what we're trying to do is become aware of the many possibilities or tools available to us, to be exposed to methods or thoughts that we weren't before, and then to treat them all as, maybe this works sometimes. And the tricky bit, like you say, with workshop is that, well, first of all, I find the process of being a reader has been more constructive for my writing, in my experience with workshops. But then there have also been things that I heard in workshop which were absolutely unhelpful for the piece that was being workshopped, but that did sort of plant a seed or play a part in a then later essay that the feedback giver has never read or even imagined.
Yeah, it's not an all or nothing thing. Yeah, that's really interesting that, like, the suggestions we get on one given piece, you never know how they might influence you later, even if they don't help that piece. And that's kind of what the MFA is all about, right? It's just like, for me, I just remember feeling inundated with new information. It's like I'm getting all these suggestions from my professors, all of these comments from my peers. I'm reading lots of stories in workshop. I'm reading stories for literary magazines. It's just a lot, kind of an onslaught of information that can feel overwhelming at times, but you never know how those things are seeping into your subconscious and coming out in various ways later once you kind of filter out the noise a little bit.
Absolutely. I don't know So I'm not sure how representative this is. I know I'm not the only one. But my reason, so I came to writing late. I was 31 when I entered the MFA program. I'm 35 now. I took a creative writing class in college and really enjoyed it. It was an accident. I tried to leave. There was one of those miraculous professors and a great novelist, Judy Troy, who kind of tricked me into spending some time, and I enjoyed it. But then, other than a little bit of blogging when I was traveling, I didn't write for years and years. And so then I got through my own, I'm a behavioral health worker, and I got into that because I had my own crisis, years of it really. But I got exposed to some systemic issues, and unfortunately, it's like pretty typical American story. But there are systemic structures that don't allow for or support the success of some folks while allowing for the success and supporting other folks. And witnessing all of this and some personal experiences led me to a sort of what felt like an obligation. It's like I need to figure out a way to expose, explain, share this tragedy, this thing that's going on with a lot of people. And so writing seemed like a possible way to do that. And so then I started writing. I knew that I wasn't able to do it well enough. And I don't like using words like well enough for anyone else, but I'll use them for myself. One way I knew that I wasn't ready is that I sent an essay out to like 90 or 100 places, and they all sent form rejections back. That was one way to find out that maybe I wasn't ready. So I was like, I Googled, how do I get better at writing? And of course, the MFA programs show up. But anyway, the way I entered the program was I had a book that I wanted to write, a particular sort of book. And I thought that the MFA was going to be about me writing that book. And what I compare this to is when I was in high school, I played a lot of different sports, but like let's take basketball, for example. Before basketball camp, I thought we would go to basketball camp and we would play a shit ton of basketball games. But then what you do at basketball camp is you like identify the hand that you dribble most poorly with. And then you spend hours doing this thing that is very difficult and you're not inherently good at, and other drills, right? You're introduced to concepts of basketball. You're trying to develop skills, and there is actually very little playing basketball in like a 5-on-5 sort of setting. And it is, or for me at least, that was less fun. It was less fun than just playing. And the MFA I found is a bit more like developing skills, a bit more like being exposed to a whole bunch of different methods or strategies, being introduced to a ton of reading that you probably haven't been exposed to yet, things that may not be applicable to a project that you're working on in that moment. And now this, I know it's such a long answer to what you were talking about, but to tie it back together is that when you try to synthesize a ton of new skills and information, at least in my experience, it's a bit clunky. There was a moment in my second year when I had been drinking from that sort of fire hose that you mentioned.
Yeah.
For about a year and a half. And it's true, I had learned so much, but it was very technical. I wasn't very comfortable organically transitioning between projects. And it almost looked like I was a person trying to write, if that makes sense. This is a writer who's trying to write, and we can see it on the page. Unfortunately, these words on the page, they're almost incoherent. There's like, we don't know what's being said here. And that moment was really discouraging. It can be challenging, I think.
So then what happened?
Yeah, so then what happened?
I mean, so then you're in this moment where you've got all of these things swimming around in your head that you know are useful, that you know you need to apply in some way, or you want to apply in some way. but when you try to apply them, it comes out clunky. It comes out like you can tell the writer is writing a story. It doesn't feel organic. How do you get past that hurdle? How do you get over it? Is that something you're still working through, or is that something you feel like you've come out the other side of that?
So, as with everything else, this is a just for me answer. But there's two things. One is that at some point during those 90 rejections that I received on that first essay, I had come into contact through a community workshop, a place called The Porch in Nashville, Tennessee. And they have online community workshops as well. It's something I suggest anyone interested in writing, check out. They're a fantastic organization. But I come to know someone who at that time I thought of as like probably one of the most significant writers in the world. And in hindsight, it was someone who's probably about where I am now in my career. A couple of publications and starting to get a little bit of a handle on things, but still very much emerging. And I was explaining to her the devastation of these rejections, having to listen to an entire album by The National after every one. It was taking up a lot, taking up a lot of time. My dog was becoming worried about me, I think. And I said, I just don't think I can do it. And she said, well, then you're not a writer. And I don't think that I would say that to anyone ever. But I know that if someone tells me I'm not something, there is a part of me that will then dedicate every fucking thing I have to becoming that thing, right? So there's that. And this is about motivations. And I have a ton of motivations that are conflicting. I just pull them off the shelf as needed. Another thing is like Anne Lamott in Bird by Bird talks about folks who write to keep the dogs at bay. Okay, so I got into writing because the dogs were not at bay. I was depressed. I was addicted. My life was just falling apart. I was not interested in living very much longer. The dogs were not at bay at all. Writing, though I didn't come to it to heal, I did discover while doing it, it helps. It helps with something, some sort of release of pressure. And then a third thing is that these wrongs that I have witnessed, they have to be discussed. They have to be righted. And so when I'm in year 2 and I can't write coherent sentences because I can't synthesize all the information I'm learning, well, there's no choice. It is to keep going. It is to, we set the alarm. We sit down at the computer. We do not move from that computer until there are either a certain number of words there or until a certain amount of time has passed, whatever I need in that moment.
So when you were in that moment, did you find working on one particular story, like if you had one particular story that like wasn't working, were you just like hammering that story, writing it, rewriting it? Or were you like, this isn't working, I'm going to try something new. This isn't working, I'm going to try something new. Like, I don't know. Do you just keep moving forward or do you allow yourself to like try different things and that's the way out of it for you?
Okay. Yep. No, that's a great question. And as indicated by my previous answer, I'm a bit psychotic. And so what I would have done left to my own devices would be that I would continue to hammer whatever particular piece I was working on. I would continue to attempt to like pile drive my way through the most direct course to a completed manuscript that I can then sell, et cetera, right? And thank goodness the MFA didn't allow me to do that. So the piece that I read from, Nothing Denied and Back, it was born during exactly this time when I can't figure out how to put sentences together. I had to take, I say had to, yes, because like a petulant child, I resisted a lyric essay course. I thought, I don't want to take a lyric essay course. I'm not writing a lyric book. I'm not going to be able to use this in the book. And so therefore, it is a waste of time because I know both the future and what will be wanted by people and what I need to have done. Anyway, so I end up in this course and through this course and another one, I'm exposed to Anne Carson's like autobiography of Red, and we read Ulysses, The Balloonists, these sort of books with voices that I hadn't heard before and in form that I hadn't seen before. And because of the MFA, I had to turn in something that was lyric-y, right? And so I remember I was actually visiting family, I think over Thanksgiving. I think it was a fall semester, and I started with just putting some memories down. And what happened is I got caught in, I think, a voice that served the aim of the piece. And then the rest of the essay was language driven. And it wouldn't have happened, none of it, if I had been self-directed, if I hadn't been part of a program that, requires a bit of stretching, some discomfort. And I don't think it would have happened if I hadn't learned every single one of those confusing things I learned in the first year.
Well, let's talk about it a little bit. The MFA program at Florida Atlantic University, it's a 3-year, fully funded program with tracks in fiction, creative nonfiction, and poetry. Your first foray into publishing wasn't a cakewalk. It sounds like your application process for the MFA also was not a cakewalk. Tell us about that process, what it was like putting together those applications, and if you ever had any doubts during that process about whether you were doing the right thing.
Yeah. So I don't know if I would be, and I hope that I would be brave enough to talk about this, even if I hadn't accomplished some of my goals, but I'm not sure that I would be. I am so grateful to emerging writers who share transparently about their stories, including rejection. And so I think here's an important takeaway from my application process. It's that I was rejected by almost everyone. I dedicated probably 6 months, and folks who are beginning to investigate the application process, you understand that it is exacting and that each program will require slightly different documentation. It takes a while to come to understand the jargon in the space. Every space has jargon, and to come to learn what it is that each program is actually offering and what things that you should be looking for. And so it was very challenging. And then I had, and I'm sure so many others have, these significant questions about whether or not I'm delusional for thinking that I could, say I do get in somewhere. Well, then what? Because these folks, they're talking about wanting me to teach. Well, I've spent the last 6 years, I was in digital marketing. I've never taught anything before. This is a true story, and I don't, oh no, yeah, this is a true story. So once I had decided that I think I'm going to FAU, I understood that I would be teaching a couple of courses, English composition, possibly creative writing. And so I did an online test that was, I think it was just like identify the parts of speech, like noun. Do you know what a noun is? and at the end of this test, I failed. I failed I couldn't diagram sentences. I don't know what the rules are. So there's this doubt, right? There's this doubt, this fear. And you add to that complexity, which is all part of the application process, and then rejection. And I think it really does. It takes very special people to believe enough in themselves. Some quiet part of themselves must believe enough to push through all of that. Yeah, that's my true story.
So you get through that grueling process. You do get into Florida Atlantic University. You go to FAU. What's it like going to campus for the first time with that doubt and also simultaneously that will to succeed no matter what?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, I think, with me, there was a little bit of an age thing. A lot of my peers were fresh out of undergrad. And so I felt a little bit like Billy Madison, who they wouldn't even know the reference. Like, who. I felt a little bit like that. And then these little tots, they are so freaking smart. They they have read everything I've read, and they've read quite a bit more, and they have a handle on like contemporary social language that was new to me. I was coming from rural Tennessee, where I worked at a nonprofit for uninsured men who had addiction issues. And so that population and the language that we used there was quite a bit different than the language used in the MFA program. So it's super disorienting, right? But the gift of being a little bit of an old guy is like, well, okay, I don't care. I have a job to do, right? It's important to me, and I believe it's important to other people. And because of my own recovery journey, I'm very comfortable asking stupid questions. I'm very comfortable not knowing. And maybe most importantly, I was asking for help from the beginning. I was in the office hours. I was going to teachers' or faculty's readings, and I was asking them for help. I was showing them what I had done and asking how I could be better.
And did you find that your classmates, your professors were receptive to those questions? Did you find you were getting the time that you hoped to get and the answers you were hoping to get?
Yep. So a little bit of a soapbox, and I may sound, I'm going to be a recruiter for a brief moment, and we'll get into like an even-handed analysis of FAU's program in particular, in case anyone's interested. But the faculty have been unbelievably generous. Their talent and accomplishment is well documented. There are a number of them who are fantastic in their own fields, but one that I've connected with in particular, and I think this happens with students who are interested in it, is Papatia Bujak. And she's actually a fiction writer primarily, but her essays are fantastic. She's got a push card and an O. Henry, really accomplished. She is a writer, but she takes almost the profession and the cause of teaching incredibly seriously. And this is true of other faculty as well. They'll meet us wherever we are. So what that looks like is me receiving an email from faculty over the weekend where they haven't been able to help but think about something that I have written and asked them about, right? They are in their own personal life outside of office hours, and they're not even paid, in my opinion, adequately for the work that they do. But outside of all of that, they're thinking of me and my goals and my writing, characters on the page, craft thoughts for possible improvements. And it's a smaller program, and so that sort of thing is possible. And I have observed peers who, like me, we are at the gates of these poor folks. We are, it's like food and water outside of their office. And there are others who I think, unfortunately, they find themselves frustrated or wanting different results, but they aren't attempting to access this unbelievable resource, these really generous professionals. And it's a shame.
Well, another thing that stood out to me when I was poking around on FAU's website is that they also do this thing called the Lawrence Sanders Writer in Residence. So you have like your full-time faculty that are at FAU all the time, but then it sounds like maybe once a year they have an outside writer who comes in for a week and hangs out on campus, and you all get to spend some time with them. I'm curious to hear what that experience is like and if it's been as cool as it sounds like it is.
Yeah, man, it is. It's actually just as cool as it sounds. I'm so grateful to the Sanders Foundation for giving us that opportunity. The most recent, I mentioned Matt Bell. Matt Bell was here, and that guy, like, just such a craft tactician. Very similar to the faculty at our own school that I just mentioned. He and I are still in communication. He's rooting for me, and I'm rooting for him. But we've had folks like Paisley Rectal and Tony Jensen, Joanne Beard, Beulah Biss was before my time. Mitchell S. Jackson is coming, and I'm super excited about that. And it is what it sounds like. It's as opposed to a reading where it's like you get to get your eyeballs on this person, and it's like, okay, and they signed my book, and that was so nice. With this Sanders opportunity, we get a week in a workshop with them. Essentially, they give us the goods, right? What are these folks doing? What have they done? And now none of it's prescriptive. It's just what's worked for them. But these are people who have had, who are prolific and have had a lot of success. And we get uninterrupted time with them to get into the nitty gritty of writing. I mean, things I didn't know existed, like like alliteration and whatnot, syntax. Didn't know. Hey man, you should have been there. Yeah, if you could have been there in my first workshop. These sweethearts, I love my peers, but yeah, I didn't know about any of this stuff. I was telling someone about how growing up, I used to like tap my fingers. I would like tap out syllables of words and try and end up on my thumbs and I don't know what this says about my mind. I'm sure clinicians have some ideas about what this means about my mind. But I didn't know any of it. Anyway, I didn't know any of these things. And in the Sanders workshop, you get into all of it from varying perspectives. It's like traveling, but you don't go anywhere. They come to us. It's great.
Yeah. And that's one person comes each year for a week.
One person comes each year for a week. We do have readers, of course, also. And something that they did that was really helpful. This might happen everywhere, but Janet Silver, a literary agent from Avitas, like she's Cheryl Strayed's agent, came to campus, and we were able to show her sort of where we were in our work, and she gave us really helpful and authentic, like earnest feedback about what we were ready for, what the next steps may be. We have an author coming to campus this semester who's going to talk about doing nonfiction writing proposals, and so you get exposed to a lot.
Well, you bring up the agent coming to campus. It reminds me of one thing I was curious to ask you about, because you have gotten an agent at this point. You have put together a nonfiction book proposal that you're going to be sending out soon. I bet that listeners are going to be interested to hear what that process was like, reaching out to agents, how you ended up with your agent, and what it's like putting together a book proposal that you're going to send out into the world.
You see me, I'm like, just talking about it, my face starts to turn red and I get anxious, because once the proposal goes out, we at least have some, you can make the proposal. There are things that I can do to affect the result there. But then once it's on submission, it will be totally out of my hands. And, I don't know. I think I'll find Jesus again, maybe during that time, or any deity I will take. Okay. So here's something from when Janet Silver visited. She looked at some of the work I had done, and I knew that I wanted to write a nonfiction book. It's a little hybrid, kind of memoir, kind of reportage. I was under the impression, and this was not just a guess. This is an impression based on earnest attempts to find out online what the proposal process looks like for someone trying to write the book I was writing. And based on what I saw, I thought that I was supposed to, much like fiction, write the whole manuscript and then pursue agents. Janet Silver, while she was visiting, said, she's like, what are you doing? You should be sending these out to agents. And I said, well, it's not finished yet. I don't have a full manuscript. She said, no, this sort of thing goes out on proposal. And so that's a pretty big deal, right? Instead of showing up with the full manuscript, the editors would likely want to change significantly. We're doing a proposal instead, and might potentially be able to write this book with a little bit of financial support. I wouldn't have known that if it weren't for actually being able to communicate with an agent. And I wish I could offer specific best practices for everyone and their particular type of book. But my suggestion or recommendation is just that if you know of anyone who has an agent, as emerging writers, we have to ask for a lot of favors. And it will feel like garbage, but it will hopefully one day present the opportunity to pay it back, right? And so it's time to ask those folks who have agents if their agents could just let you know, like, hey, what do I do a proposal now? Do I not do one now? And then the actual execution of the proposal, I think that varies from agent to agent. Jennifer Carlson, who is my agent, she gave me options about how involved on the page or not on the page she could be. She prefers to get into things, and I do really well with feedback. And so there was really like 1 or 2 rounds of her looking at sort of what I now see is a little bit of a mess. Her maybe finding ways to tell me it's a little bit of a mess. And then, I just applied that psychotic part of myself. There was about a month late in summer when I didn't do anything, other than my like professional job and write and, put together the proposal.
So when the agent came to campus and told you, oh no, you're supposed to just put together a proposal and send that to agents, then you sent that out to agents and that's how you met your current agent.
Okay, yeah. So the first thing I did is I sent it to Janet Silver, the agent who visited, and and she said, "No, not for me." It's like, yeah, I don't know. A girl's like, "Hey, you're really cute," and you're like, "Oh yeah, can I have your phone number?" She's like, "Well, no, like, no, look at me, look at you, look at me, look at you," So, but I did know that it was time, and she took it seriously, and she had some good feedback for why it wasn't for her. And these things, I so badly wish that it were. I told you earlier that good enough not a helpful term to use in application to writing, and yet I use it in application to my own writing. I wish that it were as simple as, quote, good enough to obtain the right agent or good enough to get published. But really what it's about is just giving yourself the most chances to get lucky. Because if you submit to, say you think, okay, there are these just 4 agents who I want really badly. There is a very solid chance that all 4 of those agents currently have a project in their pipeline that fills the market void that your project does too. And so their rejection would have nothing to do with the quality of your prose and everything to do with what is available market-wise. So my approach was, well, it involves Excel sheets, a whole lot of organization, but most agents say they'll get back to you within 4 to 6 weeks. So then I set up tiers. First tier, I think, had 12 total agents, and I got really lucky. And Jen was in this first tier. But I was prepared for a 6-month, perhaps year-long process in which every 4 to 6 weeks I'd be sending out the query letter to another 10 to 12 potential agents.
Sounds like a fun process.
Yeah, it's awful.
Well, I mean, for you, getting a response from somebody in that first tier obviously must have been heartening. Especially, we've just been talking about those 90 rejections on your first essay. The many programs that rejected you, you've in the meantime put in all this hard work, and then you send out for these agents and you get one of your first choices. I mean, that had to feel pretty good.
It felt super good. And it wouldn't have happened. It would not have happened if there hadn't first been this little miracle where I won a small, but it's a good press, the Lasso Review. I won a creative nonfiction contest. And I unfortunately believe just having that first publication is part of what contributed to getting a second in the Florida Review. But then really, like, the agent is a product of long reads and witness, like once your work is starting to get out and generating conversations on its own. But still, even given those successes, yes, it was heartening. No, I'm not going to play it cool, Jared. When Jen was like, "Hey, you're it." Well, there's a couple things there, right? So the first thing is that you get to email all the other agents and to let them know that you have an offer in place. And this magic thing happens where all of the other agents who hadn't responded to me yet, well, they they found my email address, right? And they wanted, and a couple set up meetings because it's just this one creates a sense of scarcity. And then you get an opportunity to have conversations with other agents when you're actually secure, which is an experience that that's the only time I felt that way in, in the writing journey. But when Jen, it's not just when Jen said that she would be my agent, but it's when we got to spend an hour speaking and I understood her to be the perfect person and the person who's invested in this project. I mean, I went to the beach and I just like stood looking at the ocean. I mean, we're talking, 7 years of, I was at rock bottom, man. You don't get into mental health work. I mean, I was in a halfway house. I was on food stamps. I was estranged from family and friends. There was no future. And then futures that I could not have conceived of, but nonetheless did dream of, were coming true. And it is something that I wish so deeply for everyone who's pursuing this thing. And look, and here's a promise. The next step for me is to receive some more rejection. The next step is this thing goes out on submission, and editors, either because it's quote not good enough or because they're just working on a thing or for whatever reason, they're like, nah. And then we rely on our community, I guess, and trust that we have no option but to continue forward.
Yeah. And you've been through that rejection. So you know what it feels like and you understand. I mean, I think a big lesson to take away from what you're saying for listeners, I feel like this has been repeated a few times now in different ways. If you are rejected from anything in the writing world, it does not mean that you cannot do this. It does not mean that you are not good enough. Often it has very little to do with your writing. Sometimes it does, and you got to keep working. But oftentimes it's these other myriad factors that just happen to be working against you or not lining up for you in that current moment.
I think that's 100% true. I think that it's really important to say also that the MFA is not requisite for achieving these goals. I think the MFA it's most helpful if understood accurately. And that's why I refer to that like basketball example, the skills sort of, it's like honing skills instead of playing basketball. And I think it's really important and helpful to be aware of the financial realities that are involved in entering into an MFA program. Because fortunately, there are, and more sort of ancillary or non-traditional methods for gaining a lot of the education and community that I found in the MFA.
Well, let's talk about that financial stuff a bit because that's really important to listeners. FAU is a fully funded program. It sounds like all students teach in exchange for that funding. What's the teaching like at FAU? What kind of classes do you teach? How many? What's the funding like? All that information I think will be super useful to people.
An honest accounting. It is fully funded. However, the way that works is in exchange for teaching 2 courses, and this is 2 courses a semester, GTAs receive a stipend, and this is determined by the university, not the writing program or the English college. We receive a stipend of about like $12,000 for teaching these 2 courses. And at this moment in time, I think it's relevant to mention Florida Atlantic University is in the state of Florida, and the governor of Florida is Ron DeSantis. And at present, he and his administration are very much not only attempting to silence and undermine the humanity of any queer folk or people of color. And this is a very active campaign they're carrying out across the state. But state universities are a vessel available to the administration to do exactly that. So receiving this stipend of $12,000 for the arts, for teaching the arts, it's a less significant stipend by a lot than would be received for a GTA who's teaching STEM, science or math, etc. And so it's unlikely to change too much. The writing college is always trying, but it's unlikely to change. In addition to the 12 a year, you might get fellowships that bump that up to about $15,000 or $18,000 a year. However, a recent Google search revealed that the cost of living in Boca Raton, which is where FAU is about $76,000. And I'm not very good at math because I haven't taken a lot of Ron DeSantis's STEM courses, but you get to 18,000, that's a whole lot less than 76. And yet the MFA program is designed to receive your full attention. So teaching 2 courses, this is, you don't have an instructor who you are assisting. You are the instructor of the course. You receive a syllabus that you can amend on your own, but you're entirely responsible for the scaffolding of the curriculum and the grading of the classes, and you have office hours. And in addition to that, you're taking courses as a student. You may think or hope that you'll be doing writing, your own writing, but that will become very challenging because it is very likely that you will need to have a source of income. Now, if you're someone who is fortunate enough to not be concerned with the financial realities of the MFA, then I would say FAU is a fantastic opportunity for like an incredible faculty to student ratio where folks will help you achieve the goals that you aim to achieve. If that's not true of you, then coming to this program would require a part-time job, or like in my case, I have maintained a full-time job. And what that looked like while I was a full-time MFA student was that I had no days off during the semester. And you may think like I did, well, I'm a worker. It's okay. I'll be fine. I'm telling you, if you don't have a day off for 4 months, shit gets dark. Shit gets dark, And the alternative to that is being destitute. I mean, like calculus in the grocery store situation.
Right. And so for you, what that meant was you actually went down to part-time in the program. This is a 3-year program, but you're in your 4th year in the program.
Yeah.
You saw what you needed to do. You knew you needed to work full-time. And so you dropped down to part-time in order to make both of them work. Tell us about that decision. And also, I think, talk a little bit about advocating for yourself in a program and knowing what you need and being willing to ask for it or adapt your journey to make sure you get through this thing.
Yeah. Yep. Those are both really important. So I did step down to part-time, and it was quite literally life-saving. It does come at a financial cost, though. So if you begin to teach less courses, right, you get a smaller stipend. And if you take less courses, then that affects the fellowships you receive. And so it means paying a little bit for some of the courses that I'm taking. Because I have been fortunate enough to maintain my full-time employment, I was able to do the math and decide it's worth the time to make that payment. But I just want folks to be aware of that. The advantages were numerous, but namely, I think it's important to consider something, and that is, what am I hurrying towards by finishing the MFA? What do I think will suddenly be possible once I've obtained that piece of paper that is not possible now? And for me, because my goal isn't to teach, my goal again it's this book, right? So for me, the accomplishment of the degree doesn't actually change my life. It doesn't make more possibilities available to me. So I can afford to move more slowly, and I have found that I enjoy the entire process much more. I get to keep a foot in this literary world, like a weekly visit to campus, teach one course, that sort of thing. But I'm not I don't feel like crying every day, all day while I'm just trying to survive.
That sounds like a better way to live.
Yeah, it's been a lot better. I think everyone around me has also noticed some improvements.
Including your dog, right?
Yeah, namely her. That when I say every time I refer to we or everyone around me, there's not a big. It's just this dog, but she's in charge.
Well, man, this has been an awesome conversation. I could keep talking to you, but you sound like a busy man, and I don't want to take up too much more of your time. So, last question I ask every guest: what is one way in which the MFA experience has been different, for better or for worse, from your expectations when applying?
I think we addressed some of this initially, but in my life there have been about a million times where me not getting what I wanted was good. And what I wanted was 3 years in which I could dedicate my life to writing a book. And that is not what the MFA proved to be. It proved to be an education in craft. And now, and for the rest of my career, I get to use the foundation provided to me and the community by FAU in application of writing that book and maybe some others. We'll see.
Well, I can't wait to read whatever it is you put out next. Hopefully that nonfiction book that you're going to be sending out. I'm looking forward to seeing that on a shelf one day. And again, I think listeners should go to VQR online and read that whole essay that you read an excerpt from earlier. It really is a beautiful, beautiful essay. And it does give you a better sense of some of these things we've been talking about. So I highly suggest going to read that. Wilson, thank you so much, man. It's been so great meeting you.
Thank you, Jared. This was fantastic.